During the 17th century, theater banned women from participating as actresses due to a connotation that the theater was unsightly and full of criminals and prostitutes. Because of this, young boys played the roles of romantic female leads. This tradition of cross-dressing has continued into the theaters of the modern era. Hello, my name is Zoe Murphy, and today we will be talking about the implications and harm of cross-dressing in theaters. It is important to set some precedents on the terms that I will be using throughout the presentation. The first definition is cross-dressing, which means to wear clothing typical of the opposite sex. I will also be using the term drag, which has a more modern definition, but will be used to describe a traditional practice, clothing more conventionally worn by the opposite sex, especially women's clothes worn by a man. Both Shakespearean theater and the Takarazuka Revue in Japan use drag or cross-dressing to create a reflection of what society sees as an ideal man or woman to draw in an audience, which plays into generally accepted gender roles and stereotypes. First, we will start in the classical era with Shakespearean plays and characters. We will be specifically honing in on the female romantic lead. Since young boys did not have as much training and were considered apprentices at the beginning of their careers with Shakespeare, the roles for female characters were written to be more simple so that the young boys could act them out. Since the characters were simple, we can chalk that up to the young boy actors not being as experienced, but we must also talk about the text itself. Monologues for the main romantic female characters were used to support the main male character and his story. The woman's story was only there to be able to follow the male character around and back up his story, or to encourage him to be a better person. In one of Shakespeare's most popular monologues, Juliet laments, "O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" Juliet also says in another monologue, "Shall I speak ill of him that is my husband?" Juliet's story seems to only revolve around the idea of Romeo, while Romeo is dealing with other outside forces, such as Juliet's family's hatred of him and his friends' opinions of his actions. This plays into stereotypes that we see in modern-day gender roles. It supports the idea that women are only there to serve their male counterpart, to take care of them and support them. Women were also traditionally only around to serve the male gaze and to do their womanly duties, which makes it less obvious why modern theaters still choose to follow this tradition. Moving on to modern theater. The Takarazuka Revue is a musical theater tradition in Takarazuka, Japan, that has been around for more than 100 years, where women play every role on stage, no matter the gender. This is a coveted job for young women, helping them rise to fame if they are chosen as actresses. Women who work at the Takarazuka Revue train for 2 years by all male staff. At the beginning of their training, they are assigned a second gender. This is the gender that they will primarily play throughout their years with the Revue. The Revue takes inspiration from Western theater and movies and adapt them to fit their language and goals for their audiences. The picture above is from the Takarazuka Revue's rendition of The Phantom of the Opera. Young women will typically work at the Revue from ages 17 to 30, and after completing their work with the Revue, become more marriageable and likely to find a good match. The most coveted role a woman can play with the Revue is that of the male romantic lead. These women gain the most fame over their time with the Revue. The male staff train the female performers playing men, which display the traditional masculine stereotypes on stage. The men also train the female characters, and because of traditional gender roles, these women are trained to portray the female characters as stereotypes of women. Women who have come out of the Takarazuka Revue have been asked why they think they are more marriageable. One woman replied, basically saying that because of the Revue, she now knew how to put on her husband's coat and wait for him while he's at work. This is an obvious lean towards traditional gender roles, specifically those of the mid-20th century. Both of these gender stereotypes, male and female, show the audience that what the theater believes to be the correct assignment of roles in a traditional relationship. This is regressive in the current day and age and does not help more gender role-based countries reform from their dated thinking. Moving back to the classical era, we will talk about a piece of history that is less well known. This is a quote that I found while researching Shakespearean boy actors. Young boys were snatched on their way to school by child catchers who roamed the streets of London in the late 16th and early 17th century. They were then forced to perform on the stage, often in seedy theaters for the titillation of predominantly male audiences. This information came as a surprise to me because, as most Shakespeare students know, Shakespeare hired young boys as apprentices, meaning that they were training for a job that they most likely wanted. Elsewhere, though, this is not the case. Young boys of all status, including noble and poor, were kidnapped to fill the need for young boy actors. In fact, Queen Elizabeth I supported this kidnapping of young boys. She signed warrants allowing theaters to capture children for their companies. This was unfortunately for monetary reasons and to keep these theaters afloat. The theaters resorted to selling tickets to plays that sexualized the young boys, and then would often sell the boys off as prostitutes after the shows. Today, modern theaters such as the Globe and Cheek by Jowl partake in the traditional stylization of Shakespearean cross-dressing. Over the last decade, the Globe has performed Twelfth Night by William Shakespeare twice, recasting the lead female roles of Olivia and Viola into female parts played by men, not the traditional boy players. The Globe Theater asked audiences to focus on the actor's skill and not their gender, so that we as audiences could examine contemporary gender roles and their relationship to the performance. Cheek by Jowl ran performances of As You Like It in a touring company for around 4 years. The cast consisted of all male actors who played both the male and female roles. The female actors were not played by boy players, but rather men, just like the Globe's production of Twelfth Night. In Cheek by Jowl's performance of As You Like It, they did not explicitly state why they chose to cast the show in the way that they did. Rather, in their program, they depicted the tradition of ritual and the origins of theater. They use a quote stating, "One feature that both rituals share is the representation of androgyny. In most theologies, the most ancient deities are androgynous. In order to represent their gods, the actors would have to dissect the personalities and their bodies and their movements." Cheek by Jowl also goes on to say that Dionysus was one of the oldest double-sexed deities. Ceremonies in his honor included the liturgical dressing up of men as women and women as men. These dramas were enacted by male, masked players taking both male and female roles. Given the modern examples stated above, there are multiple reasons why today's theater should not be cross-dressing and using drag when casting. The casting choice of the Globe's Twelfth Night is interesting and halfway explains itself when saying that they want to explore contemporary gender roles, but lacks to reflect all of the gender roles of today's society and within the play that they are producing. If a play can have men play only a couple of the female characters, why not add more females acting as men as well and choose a variety of different characters to do in traditional drag? The same goes for Cheek by Jowl's performance of As You Like It. If you have the power to cast only male characters, you should have the power to cast equal parts male and female characters. Since Cheek by Jowl specifically states androgyny in rituals as part of their decision-making, androgyny can be played as any gender, so why not hire equal parts men and women? Overall, there's more that theaters can be doing for their workers and their patrons before we go back to analyze traditional casting and the drag and cross-dressing roles that we see now. Drag roles and cross-dressing are harmful to the actor and the image of gender roles in our society. The Takarazuka Revue and Shakespearean theater both use or have used these techniques of drag, pants, and cross-dressing roles to draw in audiences. The roles played have reflected negative gender roles and societal views of the people playing the roles and the genders of said roles. Thank you very much.